In the year 1571, the icy corridors of the Kremlin stirred with uneasy excitement. Tsar Ivan IV, already known to his people as Ivan the Terrible, had made a royal decree. He would take a third wife, but not just any woman would do. A bride show was declared. Dozens of young noblewomen were summoned to the palace from across the vast lands of Russia. They were measured not only for beauty but for silence, obedience, and bloodline. Among the chosen was Marfa Sobakina, the daughter of a wealthy merchant from Novgorod. She was delicate, graceful, quiet, a portrait of innocence. And in a court ruled by suspicion and blood, innocence was dangerous. The bride show was a tradition, but under Ivan's reign, tradition had grown teeth. Every smile hid secrets. Every curtsy was a gamble. For the women, this was no fairy tale. It was a cage made of silk and frost. The one chosen would become tsaritsa, but at what cost? The court watched as Ivan made his rounds. His eyes were heavy with calculation. This was not a man looking for love. This was a ruler seeking control, a czar seeking a symbol. When Marfa was chosen, no cheers rang out, only a hush. Her fate had been decided, not by love, nor destiny, but by a ruler whose hands had long forgotten mercy. Behind the palace walls, preparations for the wedding began. Gilded robes were sewn. A crown was forged. But beneath it all, something else was brewing, something no dowry could cover. Because, as the Tsar's bride, Marfa was not walking into a marriage. She was stepping into a slow death, and the court would watch it unfold, one poisoned breath at a time. She was chosen. Marfa Sobakina, the quiet daughter of a merchant, had been selected by the most feared man in Russia. Tsar Ivan IV, known across the continent not only for his brilliance but for his brutality, had made his decision. Out of hundreds of noble daughters, courtesans, and hidden heirs, he had settled on her. No one smiled when the announcement was made. There were no public celebrations, no fireworks, only silence. Heavy, dreadful, a silence that fell like a velvet shroud across the court. Marfa was delicate, known for her pale complexion and soft-spoken manner. And perhaps that's why Ivan chose her, not for love, not for alliance, but because she posed no threat. She could be molded, owned, broken, if necessary. In public, Ivan spoke of peace, of stability, of securing the empire's future with a proper tsaritsa. But behind closed doors, even his closest advisors knew better. Ivan did not trust peace. He fed on suspicion. He drank from the cup of paranoia daily. The bride he selected would be watched, tested, and punished for even imagined disloyalty. Preparations for the wedding began immediately. Royal tailors worked through the night. Clergy were summoned. The Kremlin was readied for a wedding wrapped in gold and guarded by shadows. But something was already wrong. Even before the wedding, Marfa began to fall ill, fainting spells, fevers. Her hair thinned, her skin paled further. The court whispered of poison. Some believed it came from jealous rivals. Others suspected the Tsar himself, already toying with his prey. Ivan called for healers and physicians, but not to save her, to uncover who dared strike at his property. Marfa, silent and shrinking, stood at the center of it all. The Tsar had chosen her, and now she would be his. Not his queen, not his equal, his possession, and her suffering had only just begun. Even before she could wear the crown, Marfa began to wither. At first, it was subtle, a flush in her cheeks that refused to fade. Then the trembling started. Her hands, once steady and graceful, now shook when she lifted a goblet. Her appetite vanished. Her hair began to fall in clumps. Her skin turned pale, almost translucent, like the frost that clung to the Kremlin walls. And the whispers began. The court, always watchful, began to murmur about poison. In the shadows of the corridors and behind closed doors, names were spoken with care. Some blamed rival noble houses, angling to place their own daughters in the Tsar's favor. Others suggested it was an enemy of the state, striking at Ivan through his chosen bride. But beneath the surface, there was a more terrifying theory, that the poison had come from within. Ivan had a history of testing loyalty through cruelty. He had turned friends into enemies with a glance, executed boyars for imagined plots, and exiled entire families for words spoken in jest. Could it be that the Tsar himself had orchestrated her illness? Not to kill, but to watch, to see who reacted, to see who mourned, who whispered, who betrayed. The Kremlin's air grew heavy with suspicion. Doctors were summoned, foreign alchemists brought in with tinctures and talismans. But no remedy worked. Her body continued to fail her. And yet, Ivan refused to cancel the wedding. To him, Marfa was already his. Illness did not change that. Some say she was drugged with herbs to suppress her fertility. Others claimed mercury had been slipped into her food. A few whispered of dark magic, of witches hiding in plain sight. But whatever the truth, one fact remained. Marfa Sobakina, the bride of the Tsar, was dying before their eyes, and no one dared to stop it. The day of the wedding arrived, draped not in joy, but in dread. Marfa Sobakina, barely able to stand, was dressed in layers of silk and fur, her skin cold to the touch. Servants whispered that she needed to be carried between rooms. Her eyes, once bright, were sunken and glassy. And yet, Ivan insisted the wedding go forward. He would not be denied his bride. The ceremony was held in the Cathedral of the Annunciation, a place of grandeur now heavy with foreboding. Courtiers stood in forced silence as vows were exchanged. Ivan, towering and severe, placed the crown upon Marfa's frail head. She did not speak. She did not smile. She barely moved. Some say she collapsed moments after the blessing. Others claim she was supported by attendants, kept upright by sheer force of will, or royal command. But all accounts agree on one thing. The bride was dying as she was married. The guests said nothing. They knew better. In the days that followed, her condition worsened. She was moved to a chamber deep within the Kremlin, hidden from public view. Ivan called in physicians from across the empire. He interrogated healers, punished midwives, and ordered torturers to extract confessions from anyone remotely connected to the bride's declining health. The wedding should have been a unifying moment for the realm. Instead, it became a storm cloud. Nobles feared that one wrong glance would draw suspicion. Ivan's anger simmered just below the surface, and everyone knew it wouldn't take much to make it boil over. Even in her suffering, Marfa became a symbol of corruption, betrayal, or divine punishment. No one knew for certain, but everyone knew this. The Tsar had taken a bride, and instead of a celebration, he had been given a corpse in waiting. And the real horror was just beginning. Marfa Sobakina never left her bed again. The wedding had sealed her fate, not as Tsaritsa of Russia, but as a living ghost inside palace walls. Each morning, her breath grew more shallow. Her limbs stiffened. Her eyes stopped tracking movement. Some said she was no longer in pain, because her body had become too weak to feel it. Others believed she still suffered, silently, through every hour of her slow decay. The Kremlin physicians were helpless. Their leeches, potions, and prayers did nothing. Ivan demanded answers, but none came. Instead, he received excuses, and that only made things worse. He paced her chamber, watching her body waste away like melting snow. His fury grew cold and calculated. If no cure could be found, then someone would be blamed. His suspicion now had direction. His grief had found a target. Marfa's family, once honored by the Tsar's selection, were now viewed as traitors. Her father, Vasily Sobakin, was questioned, threatened, and eventually died under mysterious circumstances. Her household was dismantled. Servants were tortured. Neighbors disappeared overnight. Outside, the people began to whisper, not of poison, but of a curse. That the Tsar's hands were stained with too much blood. That no woman could survive him. That Marfa's death was not a murder, but a divine rejection. Inside, Marfa remained silent. Some say she lingered for 2 weeks, others say 3. But all agree she faded slowly, piece by piece, until she became a pale echo of the girl who once stood before the Tsar. On the final night, there were no witnesses, only a still room and a stiller body. She was 18 years old, and with her last breath, the Kremlin grew colder. Ivan had married a corpse, and now he would make the world pay for it. When Marfa Sobakina died, something inside Ivan broke. It was not the grief of a widower. It was the rage of a man betrayed by the world itself. His sorrow did not bring mourning. It brought fire and blood. The Kremlin fell into a suffocating silence, pierced only by the Tsar's orders, cold, precise, and unforgiving. He demanded names. He demanded blame. Physicians were dragged into dungeons, accused of incompetence, or worse, conspiracy. Torture became the Tsar's medicine for the truth. Screams echoed through palace walls, but no one confessed to Marfa's death. Still, the punishments continued. Ivan turned his gaze to the nobility. He accused boyars of treason, whispering that Marfa had been poisoned by enemies of the state. Her death, he claimed, was no accident. It was a message. And now, he would send one back. Executions resumed. Estates were seized. Entire families vanished under cover of night. Ivan's court, once a place of ambition, became a gallery of fear. Eyes avoided his. Servants flinched at his shadow. The Tsar had lost his bride, but he gained something else. Purpose through paranoia. He even questioned the traditions that led to the bride's show itself. Had he been manipulated? Had traitors used the bride selection to place a venomous pawn in his bed? Whether or not he believed it didn't matter, the punishment would be the same. Marfa's death became a legend, but not for its tragedy, for its consequence. Because after her, Ivan no longer saw people, only threats. Historians would later point to this moment as the final fracture of Ivan's sanity. The calm before the storm of the Oprichnina, the seed of the terror to come. And all of it, every scream, every beheading, every ghost that wandered the palace halls, was born from a wedding veil soaked in silence. The Tsar had lost a bride, and in return, he would set Russia ablaze. Marfa was gone, but her absence remained a wound that bled into every corner of Ivan's court. The Tsar's grief had curdled into obsession. He would not let her death go unanswered. And so, the interrogations began. No one was safe. Ivan's men swept through noble households like a plague. Servants were bound and beaten. Physicians were chained and questioned without rest. Every herbalist, midwife, and apothecary who had ever laid a hand on Marfa's body was called to account. It didn't matter if their hands were clean. The Tsar saw guilt in every hesitation, treason in every trembling voice. Under torture, men confessed to crimes they never committed. Women admitted to poisonings they had only read about in whispered rumors. Bones cracked beneath hot irons. Flesh blistered beneath rods. The truth didn't matter, only the spectacle. And all the while, Ivan watched. Some say he began to keep lists. Others claim he dictated the methods of torture personally. He demanded details. What was used? How long did they scream? When did they break? For Ivan, this was more than justice. It was ritual, a cleansing by pain, a way to bleed the fear out of his empire, one broken body at a time. Even Marfa's surviving attendants were not spared. One by one, they were stripped, flogged, interrogated. Her chambermaids vanished. Her old nurse was burned at the stake. Her mother was never seen again. By now, the boyars no longer whispered about poison. They whispered about madness. The court no longer feared disease. It feared the Tsar. What had started as a royal wedding had become a blood-soaked reckoning. And every confession, every accusation, every scream that echoed through the Kremlin was Ivan's answer to the question no one dared ask aloud. Who killed the bride? And Ivan's reply was simple: everyone. Marfa's death was not just the end of a life, it was the beginning of a reign of terror. In the months that followed her funeral, Ivan made a decision that would change Russia forever. He created the Oprichnina, a state within a state, ruled by fear, obedience, and absolute loyalty to him alone. At its core was a new force, the Oprichniki. Dressed in black robes, riding black horses, they carried brooms to sweep away treason and dog heads to sniff out betrayal. They were not soldiers. They were executioners. Ivan's personal inquisition. What began as grief had mutated into a system. The boyars, the ancient Russian nobility, were the first targets. Ivan blamed them for everything, for poisoning Marfa, for plotting his downfall. for every imagined betrayal in his fevered mind. Their homes were seized, their families scattered or killed. Some were forced to dig their own graves while the tsar watched. And behind it all, the shadow of Marfa lingered. Though her name was rarely spoken, her death hung over every act of violence. The Oprichnina did not just punish the disloyal, it punished the uncertain, those who looked away too long, those who failed to weep hard enough, those who flinched when Marfa's portrait was passed in the hall. Ivan no longer ruled with a crown, he ruled with dread. Entire cities were purged. In Novgorod, thousands were drowned in the Volkhov River, accused of conspiracies Ivan never proved. The Tsar's grief had become a sickness that spread like wildfire, reducing tradition, loyalty, and human life to ash. The court had asked once, what killed the Tsar's bride? Now the empire was learning the price of the answer. Marfa was gone. But her ghost had fangs, and it rode with the Oprichniki, cloaked in black, across a kingdom that no longer knew safety, only silence. The official story was poison, but unofficially, Russia whispered something darker. Some said Marfa was cursed, that the moment Ivan laid eyes on her, death began counting backwards. In villages, people spoke of witches hiding among noble families, of spells woven into veils and hexes stirred into wine. They said the bride show was a trap, not for Ivan, but for Marfa herself, that she was marked from the start. The Kremlin stone halls echoed with more than footsteps now. They echoed with superstition. Others believed differently. They claimed it wasn't magic that killed Marfa. It was madness, but not hers, his. Ivan, they said, had poisoned her mind long before her body collapsed. His touch carried fear. His voice carried suspicion. His love, if it could be called that, was a slow suffocation. Perhaps Marfa's body simply could not endure the burden of being loved by a man who trusted no one, not even his own reflection. Some physicians, years later, would speculate about illness. Mercury poisoning, perhaps, from medicines meant to enhance fertility. Others blamed stress, nerves, a failure of the body under the unbearable weight of court life. But all these theories came too late. The damage had been done. The corpse had been buried. The Tsar had moved on, but not without scars. In the end, no one could prove anything. The evidence was ash. The witnesses were dead. The truth had been tortured into silence. What remained was a tale, a myth, a lesson. To some, Marfa's death was divine punishment. To others, it was political cleansing. But for Ivan, it was confirmation of what he already believed, that the world was full of betrayal, and only violence could keep it at bay. Witchcraft, madness, medicine, politics. It no longer mattered what had killed the bride, because in the eyes of the Tsar, everyone was guilty. Marfa Sobakina died quietly, but her death screamed across history. She was never meant to be remembered. Just another royal wife, a name sewn onto a scroll, a brief chapter in a Tsar's turbulent reign. But her slow, painful death became something else entirely. A symbol, a warning, a turning point. In the years after Marfa's passing, Russia changed. The Oprichnina tightened its grip. The executions grew more frequent, the paranoia more permanent. Ivan's fury found new targets: clergy, nobles, peasants. Entire families vanished overnight, and through it all, her name lingered like a faded bruise, not spoken openly, not praised, but felt. Some chroniclers framed her as a martyr, an innocent caught in the gears of a crumbling empire. Others cast her as the cursed bride, doomed from the moment Ivan laid eyes on her. But all agreed. After Marfa, the Tsar was never the same. She was not the only wife to suffer. Others would follow. Some would die. Some would flee. But Marfa was the first whose death felt like prophecy, a mirror held up to the soul of a ruler already breaking. Her story survived in whispers, in court gossip, in fragments of letters and ink-stained pamphlets passed in secret. A poisoned bride, a mad Tsar, a kingdom unraveling thread by thread, And even today, she appears, quietly, in books, documentaries, podcasts. Her name surfaces in discussions of Ivan's descent, his cruelty, his mind unraveling. She is the wound that history never closed. Marfa Sobakina never ruled. She never wore the crown in strength. She left behind no heirs, no speeches, no legacy of power. And yet her story remains, not because of what she did, but because of what was done to her. And because the silence that followed her last breath was louder than any scream.